It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. Absolutely delighted that you are here. Thank you for joining us. A couple of fun things coming up. We have an interview with Jeff, who's going to tell us his out of religion story a little later on. We have a super shitty 401k. So that's not just a super shitty fund, it's a super shitty 401k. And I was afraid that more and more of this was going to be happening in the coming years because of one of the rules that passed by the government allows annuities and other bullshit investments in 401ks. So 401ks might be a little less reliable going forward, something to keep in mind. And then just another bonus segment on investing. I talk about a target date versus two index funds. And as I say in the segment, I have profoundly oversimplified the situation to give you kind of a feeling for where my head is at in reference to target date funds. And of course, in the segment, I say, like I'm saying now, target date funds often are not the optimal choice, but I want to make sure I'm perfectly clear. And again, I have this in the segment. It depends on your situation. Given your situation, especially if you are limited to choices inside of a 401k or a 403b or something like that, a target date fund might be the absolute best thing that you can select. But if you have a lot of choices, target date funds are often suboptimal to downright bad for you. And anyway, and I'm not going to spend too much time on that because that's what the whole segment is about. And like I said, I oversimplified it, but you'll get the point. So lots of fun things coming up. One other thing I want to do before we take the little break to get into the segments, Schwab. So I've gone through the training. I think that I'm all set up, and I have mentioned before it's different. It's not necessarily better. It's not necessarily worse, but I'm trying to become used to working within their system. And I think it's going fine. And there's a few things that annoy me, and almost none of it you'll see, but it's just differences. But one thing that I wanted to cover in advance, and by the way, in case you haven't heard in other episodes, if you currently have an account at TD Ameritrade with an advisor, someone like me or someone else, it probably will not move from TD Ameritrade to Schwab until the second or third quarter of calendar year 23. So I'm in winter of 22. So it's going to be a year and a quarter, year and a half. So there's time. But one of the things I wanted to mention now, while it's in my mind, Schwab is very earnestly promoting Schwab Bank and banking. And if you fill out the right forms, your advisor can help you cut checks to pay your electric bill. I think the example I gave before was, giving money to somebody, for a birthday or whatever. That's cool and all, but I'm not going to help you with that. There's a couple of reasons. One, I don't want to be your personal banker. I don't want to be writing checks for you. Anyone who calls me up and says, "Hey, Phil, can you create a check for $100 to pay this person for a tire that I bought or something?" It's not going to fucking happen. It's just not. It's not what I do. The other reason, of course, is even if you sign up to get access to have me do something like that, the other reason is for custody rules. If I can write a check on your behalf to send to somebody other than you, that is considered custody, or is likely to be considered custody, as if I had access and owned the money just like you do, equally to you. I'm not doing that. There's a lot of regulations and rules and problems with that. And I'm genuinely surprised that this is something that Schwab allows advisors to do. And it could be a trade-off between security and convenience. TD Ameritrade had made the decision that advisors could not do that. I support that decision. I don't think the advisor should be in the position to be able to write checks for you to a third party. Even if you turn that function on, I will not participate. So just so you know in advance, just so we're clear, one of the other things I think Schwab was talking about that they allow advisors to do, and again, this is another thing that I will not be doing, is that I could log in and change your address. TD Ameritrade used to allow that years ago, and it's one of those things that every once in a while clients, when they move, they contact me and say, hey, Phil, here's my new address. Great. Thank you. I actually do appreciate you sending it to me. But then I have to tell that person, well, now you need to contact TD Ameritrade and change it there because I can't change your address. Well, at Schwab, apparently, currently, and this won't really matter for a year and a half probably, and if it doesn't change, I would be able to change your address. And I might change my mind between now and then, but at this point in time, my position will be, I will not be doing that. I don't want the responsibility if it's entered wrong and goes to the wrong place. I don't want there to be any confusion about will I or can I change your address? Will I change it to myself and send me checks? The idea that these two things are available to advisors, I'm a little skittish about it, maybe a lot of skittish, but one of my ways to solve it is I am not going to participate in these possibly very beneficial customer service features. I will not be doing those. So just in case it comes up or in case you hear that this can be done at Schwab and it may be that you can do it there, doesn't mean I am going to help you in the way that Schwab tells you that I might have the ability to do so. I sure hope that made sense. And like I said, it probably won't matter at all to anybody for a year and a half. But anyway, let's take a quick little break and we'll get into the good stuff.
Section 2. Is the Old Testament inspired? If it is, it should be a book that no man, no number of men could produce. It should contain the perfection of philosophy. It should perfectly accord with every fact in nature. There should be no mistakes in astronomy, geology, or as to any subject or science. Its morality should be the highest, the purest. Its laws and regulations for the control of conduct should be just, wise, perfect, and perfectly adapted to the accomplishment of the ends desired. It should contain nothing calculated to make man cruel, revengeful, vindictive, or infamous. It should be filled with intelligence, justice, purity, honesty, mercy, and the spirit of liberty. It should be opposed to strife and war, to slavery and lust, to ignorance, credulity, and superstition. It should develop the brain and civilize the heart. It should satisfy the heart and brain of the best and wisest. It should be true. Does the Old Testament satisfy this standard? Is there anything in the Old Testament, in history, in theory, in law, in government, in morality, in science, above and beyond the ideas, the beliefs, the customs, and prejudices of its authors and the people among whom they lived? Is there one ray of light from any supernatural source? The ancient Hebrews believed that this earth was the center of the universe, and that the sun, moon, and stars were specks in the sky. With this, the Bible agrees. They thought the earth was flat, with four corners, that the sky, the firmament, was solid, the floor of Jehovah's house. The Bible teaches the same. They imagined that the sun journeyed about the earth, and that by stopping the sun, the day could be lengthened. The Bible agrees with this. They believed that Adam and Eve were the first man and woman, that they had been created but a few years before, and that they, the Hebrews, were their direct descendants. This the Bible teaches. If anything is, or can be certain, the writers of the Bible were mistaken about creation, astronomy, geology, about the causes of phenomena, the origin of evil, and the cause of death. Now it must be admitted that if an infinite being is the author of the Bible, he knew all sciences, all facts, and could not have made a mistake. If then there are mistakes, misconceptions, false theories, ignorant myths, and blunders in the Bible, it must have been written by finite beings, that is to say, by ignorant and mistaken men. Nothing can be clearer than this. For centuries the Church insisted that the Bible was absolutely true, that it contained no mistakes, that the story of creation was true, that its astronomy and geology were in accord with the facts, that the scientists who differed with the Old Testament were infidels and atheists. Now this has changed. The educated Christians admit that the writers of the Bible were not inspired as to any science. They now say that God, or Jehovah, did not inspire the writers of his book for the purpose of instructing the world about astronomy, geology, or any science. They now admit that the inspired men who wrote the Old Testament knew nothing about any science, and that they wrote about the earth and stars, the sun and moon, in accordance with the general ignorance of the time. It required many centuries to force the theologians to this admission. Reluctantly, full of malice and hatred, the priests retired from the field, leaving the victory with science. They took another position. They declared that the authors, or rather the writers of the Bible, were inspired in spiritual and moral things, that Jehovah wanted to make known to his children his will and his infinite love for his children, that Jehovah, seeing his people wicked, ignorant, and depraved, wished to make them merciful and just, wise and spiritual, and that the Bible is inspired in its laws, in the religion it teaches, and in its ideas of government. This is the issue now. Is the Bible any nearer right in its ideas of justice, of mercy, of morality, or of religion than in its conception of the sciences? Is it moral? It upholds slavery. It sanctions polygamy. Could a devil have done worse? Is it merciful? In war it raised the black flag. It commanded the destruction, the massacre of all, of the old, infirm, and helpless, of wives and babes. Were its laws inspired? Hundreds of offenses were punished with death. To pick up sticks on Sunday, to murder your father on Monday were equal crimes. There is in the literature of the world no bloodier code. The law of revenge, of retaliation, was the law of Jehovah. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a limb for a limb. This is savagery, not philosophy. Is it just and reasonable? The Bible is opposed to religious toleration, to religious liberty. Whoever differed with the majority was stoned to death. Investigation was a crime. Husbands were ordered to denounce and to assist in killing their unbelieving wives. It is the enemy of art. Thou shalt make no graven image. This was the death of art. Palestine never produced a painter or a sculptor. Is the Bible civilized? It upholds lying, larceny, robbery, murder, the selling of diseased meat to strangers, and even the sacrifice of human beings to Jehovah. Is it philosophical? It teaches that the sins of a people can be transferred to an animal, to a goat. It makes maternity an offense for which a sin offering had to be made. It was wicked to give birth to a boy, and twice as wicked to give birth to a girl. To make hair oil like that used by the priests was an offense punishable with death. The blood of a bird killed over running water was regarded as medicine. Would a civilized God daub his altars with the blood of oxen, lambs, and doves? Would he make all his priests butchers? Would he delight in the smell of burning flesh?
You're listening to The Bill Ferguson Show.
Welcome back, everybody. The next segment, we have a very nice conversation with someone who has found their way out of religion. We are talking today with Jeffery Swanson. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Oh, not a problem. And you reached out to me, and we had a little bit of communication back and forth. And you were religious, if I can say it that way?
Oh, yeah, more than just religious. I'm going to use a term over and over here again, Phil,
Yeah.
as a way of distinguishing the type of religion. So when you take a look at polls in America, I think, what is it now? Even still, it's something like upwards of still 60-70% would claim that they're affiliated with some kind of religion. And some of these I find to be fairly innocuous. My kind of religion that I found my way out of was more problematic. The term I'm going to use is fundagelicalism.
Okay.
And it's a combination of conservative evangelicalism / fundamentalism. I've seen and heard that word used a few times. I think it's very, very accurate. Evangelicals hate that word because they don't want to be lumped together with fundamentalists. But I'm going with what one Christian blogger said out there, a more progressive Christian blogger. He said, evangelicals nowadays have become the new fundamentalist. And I think that needs to be called out.
Yeah, it's a fine line. Is there a specific denomination that you'd want to mention, or is it just a one-off church?
No, there was a few that I had gotten involved with. So back in my 20s, my intense, more is always better kind of state.
Yeah.
I found myself gravitating more toward the Pentecostal variety because there you get this very intense emotional component with your religion.
Right.
And it makes it feel like it's more real. It's not just a cerebral, conceptual kind of faith. But at one point, as I started working through my own college studies, developing some of my own thinking capability, I found that to be some of their theology to be quite unsatisfactory, and I found myself gravitating towards a particular Baptist church that we had in town. And some of your listeners might even be familiar with this. It was a young upstart back in those days in the 1980s called Dr. John Piper. He had a PhD in New Testament theology, and he had this absolute pedigree worth of an educational background from all the right institutions.
Yeah.
When I started attending his church, it was a small little thing of maybe 300-400 people. And right now it's a multi-campus church. I think they must have 5,000 to 7,000, 8,000 people in it. He has gone on to become an internationally renowned evangelical leader and has written probably the better part of over 15 books. And huge influence within the evangelical world. So Dr. Piper, he's the one that probably shaped a lot of my thinking and directed me during much of my Christian experience.
Wow, yeah. So you were pretty deep into it, pretty serious, and you mentioned college. You started learning things, or you started questioning. Walk me through that. What exactly happened there?
No, not at all in college. So
okay.
Let me backtrack a little bit more.
Yes.
My parents were missionaries, are. Once you were, you always are. And they were career missionaries. I think they were overseas for about 30 years or so. I was raised in the Orient myself.
Okay.
And never really liked it because it always felt like we were the other, we come back to the U.S., we're kind of strange. We go out and visit different churches. We have to stand up front, wear a funny little Chinese hat, and sing Jesus Loves Me in Chinese in front of the congregation to get them to support us.
Yeah, and gotta pitch for some money, right?
I just hated that stuff. But my reaction against it was to, go through my own little bit of partying phase, adolescent rebellion. I went into the military because that was really the only option I had. I wasn't ready to go to college, and my folks are still living overseas. I basically needed a surrogate parent, someone that could give me food and shelter. And in the course of being in the military, after so many years of living what I'd term, my high life, travel, excitement. I was stationed abroad in Europe. You do spring in Paris, winter skiing in the Alps, and fall visiting castles in Bavaria. But
that sounds lovely.
I started to feel, pardon?
That sounds lovely. Maybe I should go in the military. No, that's not going to happen.
Those are some really fun years.
Yeah.
But after a while, it's not really still giving you a sense of purpose. And so there I found myself reconsidering my Christian upbringing, and I started going back to a church. I had a so-called born-again experience, came back to Minnesota, and there I went through an undergrad and a grad program in economics. But while I was in school, that was not when there was any kind of intellectual questioning about my faith. I was up to my neck in campus ministry, putting in upwards of 20 hours a week while still going through my college program, and 20 hours of volunteer. And then from there on, leapt into my own career. And the whole time I'm doing my career, I'm volunteering still upwards of 20 to 40 hours a week in different kinds of Christian ministries. Everything, again, from campus ministry to living in the inner city, working with a group of at-risk kids while I was in the inner city. At that time, the crack gang wars were in full force. I heard gunshots on my street on a weekly basis. One of the kids I was working with, he actually got shot. It was just stupid kids just being dickheads, I guess.
Yeah.
He's riding past on his bike. He's a complete innocent kid. He's a kid. He's 12 years old, and they shot him in the butt with a .22. That's the kind of neighborhood it was. I had my house broken into. I was physically assaulted a couple times, had several cars broken into. But we all had a sense of mission and purpose about being there. We're there to help these poor people struggling in the inner city. And then from there, I meet and married someone, very ill-advised form of how I went about that.
Yeah.
It helped contribute to my deconversion, actually. And then launched into almost full-time international student ministry. Did that for many, many years. And then finally, we had been trying to have kids. My ex, we've been divorced now for almost 10 years. She wasn't able to get pregnant. We adopted, which we've always planned on doing. I have 2 adopted kids. And those kids, ironically enough, were my salvation, so to speak.
Right.
Most times, a lot of people are going back to church when they get kids because they're looking for some kind of moral framework in which to raise their children.
I've heard that. I don't understand but I heard it.
Or looking for a little more community.
Yeah.
My kids did the opposite, actually, because once they came, I no longer had time to be putting in 20, 30 hours completely subsumed into this fundagelical subculture. That was my deliverance. Once I stepped back from that a little bit more, I was able to actually look on it from the outsider perspective, and that's when the questioning really started happening.
Wow. And did you get it from reading the Bible? Did you watch debates? Did you read books? What helped you along?
Intellectual integrity.
Okay, fair enough.
So when I was working with the internationals, if you're going to ever try to convert someone, you need to show them both why it is of what they have isn't sufficient and why it is that you have something that's better. That works also for any kind of product marketing too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're driving a nice little 1982 beater of a car, and you go into the sales room, or even if you're driving a nice newer model 2019 car, if you're going to go into the sales room, if that guy's going to successfully sell you an upgrade to 2021, he's got to point out the defects of your 2019 model, even though it might be perfectly fine, right?
Yeah.
They got to create discontent in order to get you to change. And it was the same for me. So I actually became pretty good at that. And I would talk to people about, like if you were a Muslim, I would say, have you ever thought that it was kind of peculiar that if you were a Hindu, the people who were at the top of the caste systems, the Brahmins, are the priests who made up the caste system. Doesn't that seem like there's a little self-interest involved in that kind of religion? And they would, they'd say, well, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
And then if you're with a Hindu, then you say, you start off with another line. Does it seem a little curious to you that in Islam you have a person who comes from Arabia, Mecca in particular, and he's a male, and his revelation of God says that God speaks Arabic, and the Quran, God's absolute final word coming down from paradise, every jot and tittle is absolutely perfect. There's nothing to be changed about it. It's all in Arabic. And as a part of that revelation, everyone's supposed to go back to the home city of all his relatives who are merchants there for Mecca on pilgrimage. And he, as a male, he gets to have, all men who join get to have 4 women, except for him. He gets extra, what was it? I forget now, 11 or 13 wives that he had?
Yeah, I don't
Plus concubines?
Right.
Right? And so, a Hindu would sit and look at that and say, yeah, it sounds like a religion based on self-interest, right? But then for either one of those categories, then I would point to that other version of self-interest within their religion. There came a point when I had to take a look at my own religion and recognize that it really didn't meet those same tests that I was applying to other religions.
It's a tricky thing to help people out of other religions, because like what happened to you, you start looking at your own and going, wait a minute.
Bingo.
Mine's just as silly as theirs.
Yeah. And so here, I'm now endorsing a religion that says Jews are God's chosen people. And how do we know that? Well, Jewish prophets said so. A little bit of interesting self-interest there, wouldn't you say? And in addition, because God tells you that you're his chosen people, now you're allowed to go take land from yet another people and enact genocide, kill men, women, and children to obtain that land? Does that really sound like something that would come from divine fiat and not just naked self-interest? How is that any different? And that created the real crisis of faith right there for me.
What did you do about that crisis? Did you obviously resolved it as being not religious? What happened after you realized there was a crisis? What did you do?
Well, here's something that your listeners and perhaps even that atheist or secular community needs to understand. When you spend 25 years or so forth with a certain conceptual framework, you can't rip that all out overnight and replace it with something different. So my whole way of interpreting the world was all based on this evangelical worldview. I had begun to unravel one thread of it, and it was a little terrifying at first. But I knew I needed to keep on pulling and pulling and pulling. And Phil, the bottom line there is it probably took me the better part of 7 years before I had worked through the initial pangs of doubt to where I finally felt I could come out of the closet and just announce to family and even my spouse at that time that I am no longer a Christian.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
I really empathize with gays in that way too, because it's the same thing. You feel like once you're in this culture, you've been flagged as aberrant, you've been flagged as deviant. It takes a hell of a lot of courage to finally come out and say, yeah, this is who I am. You have decided that I'm a sinner. You have decided that I'm morally depraved, but I'm not. You have decided there's something wrong with me for questioning, but no, I think I'm just simply the boy who is announcing the emperor has no clothes. That doesn't make me wrong or bad.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing, and I love these stories because I had it so easy that sometimes maybe I can't really connect because I was 13 and going through the Methodist confirmation program when I decided, hey, this is stupid. This doesn't make sense. It can't be real. And I didn't lose any friends. I still went to the same school. My parents thought it was a phase. Nah, that's not much of a story, but talking to people who worked this out as an adult. So how old were you when you got to the point where you were on your way out?
I started questioning about age 45.
Okay,
and
so that's pretty far along.
Yes, that's right. And that's why I think I'm a bit of an anomaly. Most people, if they're going to make that move, they're doing it when they're in college, in their 20s or even...
That is much more common, but there are a lot of people, and I've met some that have left religion in their 60s and 70s. Mm. And I don't know if it happened to you, but, and you know, of course, you can share what you do and don't want to share, but people that are 45 or 50 or 60, sometimes it's harder because there's this nagging feeling in your head that, holy shit, I just wasted 25 years of my life as an adult, where when it happens in college, it's like, oh, I'm just now becoming an adult and I'm learning new stuff and I can break free from this thing that tainted my childhood. But at the age of 45, you know, you've been an adult for a good 20 plus years. What else could you have done if you weren't sucked into the system of lies?
Yeah. I see these movies every now and then that are about time travel.
Yeah.
There seems to be a certain genre of them. And I remarried, happily remarried. My now current spouse, we talk through that sometimes. Okay, so if we were to go through this and if we were to go back in life, what would we do different? And it's entertaining to speculate about that, but in another sense, it's not very profitable.
Yeah, indeed.
Because I am who I am based on all those life experiences, and some of them may have been difficult, but those difficulties that we pass through, if we embrace those difficulties the right way, they do have a way of hopefully fortifying the character, our own character, our own sense of values, making us hopefully better people in the process rather than angry, bitter people in the process. I would have hoped that by me going through that, it might have created, for example, greater senses of empathy for people who might be in that, or a little greater sense of understanding now about how people create their beliefs and how important that is to them. And even along with that, maybe I hope a little bit of tactfulness so that I don't deliberately piss off people who hold on to their religion so tightly.
Yeah.
I don't do a good job of that. I piss off still way too many people, getting controversial. But, you know, Voltaire said in his Letters to England, one of his books, he said, you can no more convince a person that their religion is not true than you can convince a man that his mistress is not beautiful or that his case he's going to court with does not have merit.
Yeah, it's a tough thing. What would you suggest if someone is listening and struggling? What should they do? Is there a book that you like? Is there videos that you like? What do you think might help somebody?
One of the best things that helped me work through this, a couple good things, is you have to develop an alternate way of discerning what is real, what is not real, what is true, what is false. When I went to the deconversion, I had to rebuild my essential epistemology from the bottom up. That is, what is the method and how do I know what I know? So I studied a lot of critical thinking, and there's a number of other former fundies that I'm in contact with here in our Twin Cities area. We started up a former Fundy group, and I think there's like 400 people in it now. And that seems to be a pretty common tact. It's like, okay, before, my way of thinking and knowing what was right, what was wrong was based on revelation. Here's this late Bronze Age, early Iron Age worldview, and if they said this is the way the world works, then that's the way the world works. Now I have to come up with a whole different way, a whole different mental schema on trying to assess what is true, what is not true. And for all of us, whether we're aware of it or not, we're going through that process. It's how we learn as children. And for some people, it's well developed, and it's not. For some people, it's very, very explicit, and it's not. The other thing that really helped me along that way is reading a lot about history, European history. How did we get to where we're at right now? And when you start studying the intellectual development of Western history, you come to appreciate, why is it that 500 years ago, we used to burn little old ladies at the stake for purportedly flying brooms, and today we fly airplanes.
Yeah.
And you know what, Phil? I really prefer it that way.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing to talk to someone who's really deep in a religion, at least for a while, because they can sometimes believe and think outside of the normal reality, things that are true or not true, and it interesting, disturbing, all kind of at the same time. If someone thinks they could benefit by talking to you, how could they reach you?
Why don't you go ahead and get a hold of me at TC Urbanite, all one word. So TC stands for the town where I live, Twin Cities. Urbanite, URBANITE, at outlook.com.
All right. Well, that so if anyone's listening and thinks they can relate to Jeffrey and maybe he can help, you had mentioned in the pre-show that maybe it's time to give back and help someone else out a little bit.
Yeah, certainly. And there's a number of, I think, excellent resources out there to help people start to develop some critical thinking. For example, are you familiar with the whole teaching company, Great Courses series?
Yes. Actually, have bought many things from them.
Because I've heard you talk a lot about doing audiobooks. I feel like I've gotten almost a second master's degree just in listening to teaching companies during my daily commute to work back when that was happening pre-COVID. But Stephen Novella, noted American skeptic and neurologist, he had a fascinating series that I think is very, very helpful, a scientific guide to critical thinking. So I would give that a definite 2 thumbs up for helping people develop that kind of intellectual framework. And the other thing it does too, and here's what people have to realize, it's not just all about developing cognitive processes. Part of who we are as human beings is about our character, our personality, our emotional well-being, virtue, if you will. So if I want to get along happily in this life, really, what kind of person do I want to be going forward? It's not just what I left, it's what I want to be. And part of what I have embraced as one of my core values is humility. Now, some of the listeners hearing me bloviate here might not feel that, but I'm an agnostic. I don't know what I don't know, and I'm very, very okay with that. And the reason why is because I have become fully convinced that all humans are fallible.
I think that's a fair conclusion.
Yes. But once you have that as a starting point, it's possible then, and if the other person that you're engaged with, any kind of dialogue or even on a friendship or personal basis, if they're aware of that too, you now have a basis of equality for entering into that relationship. I might be wrong, and you might be wrong. We both might be wrong. But guess what? Let's see what we can do to figure this out together. And in the context of even something like a marital relationship, one of those common phrases that I think is very helpful is being able to simply say to your sweetheart, your significant other, I was wrong. I'm sorry. And the ability to quickly and easily admit this, I think it's just such a boon to creating much more fruitful kinds of social interactions. I just wish there was a way you could take that and extrapolate it out on a larger social level. I wonder if that just ends a huge amount of the partisanship and the political divides that we're seeing now.
Yeah, there's always room for that. I do know that I often find that people that have learned a second language, like I'm trying to do with Italian, are extra special people because the effort involved and the willingness, because the only way, unless there's a different way, I'd love to know it, I guess, but the only way for me to get good at Italian is to be bad at Italian again and again and again. The constant mistakes, and I have a tutor now that helps me learn Italian. There's a continuous string of mistakes, things that I say wrong, things that I grammar wrong, pronounce wrong, whatever. And you have to accept that correction. You have to be willing to say, if I want to be better, I have to acknowledge my mistakes and keep fixing them as I go forward. But so many people around the world, but many Americans have the attitude of, I know what I need to know, and I've learned everything there is to learn, and I'm always right. And that's a lot less fun for me to talk to that person.
Yeah. Actually, I'm trying to learn Portuguese. We are seriously considering retiring over there. But trying to learn that has maybe a little different impact. It not only induces humility, it's bad for my ego because it makes me realize just how absolutely shitty my memory has become in my older years here.
Yeah, I hear you. All right. Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for sharing with us and hopefully giving a path or some suggestions to some listeners. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come talk.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I'm very honored and look forward to continuing to listen to your podcast as well. They've been very, very helpful for me.
Thank you. The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Investments should be based on your personal situation, and you, of course, should consult with your financial advisor or tax professional before taking any actions. Regular listeners, of course, know about super shitty funds. What I have here is a super shitty 401k. I don't know the company that it belongs to. It could be yours, but a listener of the show sent me a link to Reddit to take a look at this, and the Reddit user is talking about, getting a new job. They got a new 401k. They started adding money at the beginning of calendar year 21, and then they talk about their results. Couple things that are very confusing about this. First of all, it says, my 1 year performance is minus 15.6% from January 1st through December 31st of 21. Okay, that's brutal, really bad. And then it goes on, I only had a return of plus 0.7%. So I don't know how they lost 15% and had a return of 0.7. So I'm not sure how that happened. It might have to do with the times of the market when money went in. So if you are in a calendar year that ends up 20%, but was up maybe 30 or 40% in the middle, and this is not what happened, but this is something that could happen, and maybe it happened a little bit because 21 did quite poorly at the end of the year and did really well in the beginning and middle of the year. So you would essentially be buying high, and then at the end of the year, you're low. So you could have a situation. The other thing that is interesting is that they're very concerned that this 1 year was horrible, where they're clearly not looking at the long term. Grant that they're probably new to this whole thing, so it can be kind of scary and spooky. But if you heard that everyone else made 28% and you made nothing, it's hard to not feel fucked. I get that. And it might have even been if they had the right funds because of the timing, because they didn't put all of the money in on January 1st. So if the S&P 500 made 28% for calendar year 2021, their money wasn't in for the entire calendar year. They put money in each month. So you can get very different results. Sometimes people think of that as dollar cost averaging, which it is. And dollar cost averaging can mitigate the volatility, but it might work to your disadvantage under different scenarios. And this might be one of those. Now, on top of that, it appears that the fund choices they have are pretty fucking bad. And it's not clear to me if these funds charge a sales load. Some of them are listed as Class A, some are R, R3, whatever. But the convention in the industry is that if it has an A at the end, it's a front-end load. So you could look up that information and see what the load might be if you put your money in that fund. One of the funds that was a choice inside of this 401k is Goldman Sachs Growth Opportunity A. Goldman Sachs is probably the company that set this up, underwrites it, manages it, whatever. The expense ratio is 1.23%. And so sometimes people are curious, and rightfully so, what do they get when they hire an advisor, if the advisor is a fiduciary like myself? Just the very fact that I'm encouraging you to use index funds and that you pay me for the advice versus getting stuck with something like this from Goldman Sachs, you're going to be in an index fund that is less than 0.1%. Even with paying me, if I did nothing else, you'd still be money ahead. Of course, you can go get the index funds yourself, but I'm just giving you a possible thing. It's very interesting. This fund also apparently has a 5.5% front-end load. So if you put in $1,000, see 5%, 5.5% would be $55 that you lose off the bat. And of course, that will continue if the fees aren't waived. And again, I don't know the company that put this in place or who they were going through, but they clearly have really bad funds with really high expenses and large front-end loads where the first year from the load and the expense ratio, you're losing 6 to 7% of everything you put in. And then, of course, there might have been some bad timing, which could have been a few percent. And then there's just bad performance of the things that you got once you got the money into it. And I'm going to look at this Goldman Sachs Growth Opportunity A again, GGOAX. Now, for calendar year 21, it says here at Morningstar that it made 11%. Year to date, what is it? Late January, early February, approximately. So in a month, this fund has lost 19.5%. In the last 3 months, 20%. Wow. Damn. That hurts to lose 20%. What is this fund in? So I'm going to go click on the portfolio part over here. And the portfolio is mid-cap growth, which has struggled, but the Vanguard Index Fund didn't lose anything like this. It's probably down 10%, not 20. And let's see what else it has here. It has that. Yeah, it's U.S. mid-cap growth stocks, and they apparently don't do very well. The top 10% of the holdings are 23% of the portfolio. Reported turnover is 57%. So each year they're jumping in and out of stocks. And so, of course, if this was in a taxable account, you're going to have a higher tax bill. But it's just a laundry list of these terrible funds. And I feel bad for this guy that might have lost 15%. I think it's probably more like he made nothing for an entire year, and a all U.S. S&P 500 index fund was in the high 20s, a broadly diversified portfolio with some bonds and some international. And the international was a drag in the calendar year 2021. You know, you could have made 16, 18, 20%. So how did he make nothing? So he's upset. And as a new investor, you could easily, from this 1 year experience, think this is all bullshit. It's a scam. And in this case, maybe they're right. I don't know. Does scam have to be illegal? because I would guess it's a small company. They don't qualify to play with the really big companies, and the small company did not want to be out any money to do the regulations and required contributions, or they wanted to offset them, and maybe they even get money back from the company that's managing it. And the company that's managing it put in load funds, so all of the fees and expenses are paid by the 401k, the employee of the company. So this employer, I would say, has done a great disservice to this employee. I think at this point, and they also included a list of everything else that's available based on what they have available. And this is really fucking hard to do. I think they would be better off not investing in their 401k. They would be better off investing in a taxable account. Because if you had put money in and made 15% instead of 28, I'm assuming there was some market timing issues, you might have to pay tax when you sell some stuff, but you're still going to be way ahead of zero, because the tax on zero that you saved is nothing. So, wow, this is brutal. So something to keep in mind: look at your 401k. Look for funds that have a letter at the very end. And if it's an A, it's usually a 3 to 5 to 8.5% is the legal limit. Front end load, so you might be losing 5% or more for every dollar you put in. So even if you get a match, you're still money behind. And see how those funds have done. Look at the expense ratios. Almost all modern day 401ks have at least 1 or 2 index funds. And even if they don't balance out your portfolio correctly, it's better to be overweighted in something than to get fucked even when the market goes up. So that is an example of a super shitty 401k.
Section 3. The Ten Commandments. Some Christian lawyers, some eminent and stupid judges, have said and still say that the Ten Commandments are the foundation of all law. Nothing could be more absurd. Long before these commandments were given, there were codes of laws in India and Egypt, laws against murder, perjury, larceny, adultery, and fraud. Such laws are as old as human society, as old as the love of life, as old as industry, as the idea of prosperity, as old as human love. All of the 10 Commandments that are good were old. All that were new are foolish. If Jehovah had been civilized, he would have left out the commandment about keeping the Sabbath, and in its place would have said, "Thou shalt not enslave thy fellow man." He would have omitted the one about swearing and said, "The man shall have but one wife, and the woman but one husband." He would have left out the one about graven images, and in its stead would have said, "Thou shalt not wage wars of extermination, and thou shalt not unsheath the sword except in self-defense." If Jehovah had been civilized, how much grander the 10 Commandments would have been. All that we call progress, the enfranchisement of man, of labor, the substitution of imprisonment for death, of fine for imprisonment, the destruction of polygamy, the establishing of free speech, of the rights of conscience, in short, all that has tended to the development and civilization of man, all the results of investigation, observation, experience, and free thought, all that man has accomplished for the benefit of man since the close of the Dark Ages has been done in spite of the Old Testament. Let me further illustrate the morality, the mercy, the philosophy, and goodness of the Old Testament. The story of Achan. Joshua took the city of Jericho. Before the fall of the city, he declared that all the spoil taken should be given to the Lord. In spite of this order, Achan secreted a garment, some silver and gold. Afterward, Joshua tried to take the city of Ai. He failed, and many of his soldiers were slain. Joshua sought for the cause of his defeat, and he found that Achan had secreted a garment, 200 shekels of silver and a wedge of gold. To this Achan confessed. And thereupon Joshua took Achan, his sons, and his daughters, his oxen, and his sheep, stoned them all to death, and burned their bodies. There's nothing to show that the sons and daughters had committed any crime. Certainly the oxen and sheep should not have been stoned to death for the crime of their owner. This was the justice, the mercy of Jehovah. After Joshua had committed this crime, with the help of Jehovah, he captured the city of Ai. The story of Elisha. And he went up thence into Bethel, and as he was going up by the way, there came forth little children out of the city, and mocked him, and said unto him, Go up, thou bald head. And he turned back, and looked at them, and cursed them in the name of the Lord. And there came forth 2 she-bears out of the wood, and tore 42 children of them. This was the work of the good God, the merciful Jehovah. The story of Daniel. King Darius had honored and exalted Daniel, and the native princes were jealous. So they induced the king to sign a decree to the effect that any man who should make a petition to any god or man except to King Darius for 30 days should be cast into the den of lions. Afterward these men found that Daniel, with his face toward Jerusalem, prayed 3 times a day to Jehovah. Thereupon Daniel was cast into the den of lions. A stone was placed at the mouth of the den and sealed with the king's seal. The king passed a bad night. The next morning he went to the den and cried out to Daniel. Daniel answered and told the king that God had sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions. Darius, being then a believer in the true God, sent for the men who had accused Daniel, and for their wives and their children, and cast them all into the lions' den. And the lions had the mastery of them, and brake all their bones in pieces, or ever they came at the bottom of the pit. What had the wives and little children done? How had they offended King Darius, the believer in Jehovah? Who protected Daniel? Jehovah. Who failed to protect the innocent wives and children? Jehovah. The story of Joseph. Pharaoh had a dream, and this dream was interpreted by Joseph. According to this interpretation, there was to be in Egypt 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. Joseph advised Pharaoh to buy all the surplus of the 7 plentiful years and store it up against the years of famine. Pharaoh appointed Joseph as his minister or agent and ordered him to buy the grain of the plentiful years. Then came the famine. The people came to the king for help. He told them to go to Joseph and do as he said. Joseph sold corn to the Egyptians until all their money was gone, until he had it all. When the money was gone, the people said, Give us corn, and we'll give you our cattle. Joseph let them have corn until all their cattle, their horses, and their flocks had been given to him. Then the people said, Give us corn, and we will give you our lands. So Joseph let them have corn until all their lands were gone. But the famine continued, and so the poor wretches sold themselves, and they became the servants of Pharaoh. Then Joseph gave them seed, and made an agreement with them that they should forever give 1/5 of all they raised to Pharaoh. Who enabled Joseph to interpret the dream of Pharaoh? Jehovah. Did he know at the time that Joseph would use the information thus given to rob and enslave the people of Egypt? Yes. Who produced the famine? Jehovah. It is perfectly apparent that the Jews did not think of Jehovah as the God of Egypt, the God of all the world. He was their God, and theirs alone. Other nations had gods, but Jehovah was the greatest of all. He hated other nations and other gods, and abhorred all religions except the worship of himself.
You're listening to The Bill Ferguson Show.
I want to have a little discussion on why target date funds might be suboptimal depending on your situation. And the math that I'm going to go over is, of course, profoundly oversimplified to make a point. And one might even argue it's not only oversimplified, but it's an extreme example because I want to bring out the point so that it becomes significant to you. Keep it in mind, I'm not talking about any tax consequences. I'm not talking about having the ability to buy different bond or stock index funds, domestic versus international. Again, profoundly oversimplified, and it's just for fun, math fun, just for discussion purposes, because I want to make a point. Also, a caveat that in some cases, depending on the options available to you, particularly in a work-sponsored plan, the target date fund might be the single best option that you have. And that's not good, because I think one can do generally better. But if the funds that are available to you are awful, and the only ones that are halfway decent are the target date funds, the advice or the opinion for me, might be that the target date fund is the best choice that you have among the choices available to you. So I wanted to get that out in advance, that a target date fund in and of itself may not be a horrible choice. I don't want you to look at your 401k and go, the one thing I know I don't want to get is a target date fund. I am not saying that at all. So again, check with your professional investment advisor, check with your tax consultant. And of course, the real world is way more complicated than this complicated yet profoundly overly simplified example. All right, enough caveats. Let's get into the details. We are looking at a portfolio that has $100,000. We're going to compare the effect of two different investment strategies with this $100,000. One is inside of a target date fund, and one is outside of a target date fund where you own a bond index fund and a stock index fund separately instead of having them, both of those types of investment, inside of the target date fund. To further simplify, it's going to be 40% bonds and 60% stocks. And all the way through this scenario, we are going to assume that the bonds make zero, that the bonds lose zero, and when the recovery happens, the bonds again make zero. All of that is wrong, but again, work with me here just a little bit. So if you have a target date fund and it's 40% bonds and 60% stocks, that would be pretty much equivalent to you owning two separate index funds, one that's bonds in $40,000 and one that's stock in $60,000. In both cases, you have a 60-40 split, stocks versus bond. In both cases, you might have index funds. Your asset allocation is the same. The total value of your portfolio is the same. It's 100,000, 60% stocks, 40% bonds. So far, everything is cool. Now, all of a sudden, we have a completely unexpected and ginormous drop in the stock market of 50%. Again, warning, this is for theoretical discussion only. I'm not predicting the market's going up or down in any way. I'm just creating a theoretical scenario. In the theoretical scenario, let's look at the two different funds that you have. You have 40,000 in bonds. You still have 40,000 in bonds. You had 60,000 in stocks. You now have 30,000 in stocks. The stock market went down by half. So you have 40,000 bonds, 30,000 in stocks. In the target date fund, the same exact thing happens. It's not a magical thing. A lot of them actually own the very same index funds that you could have on your own. And in this target date fund, the bonds that are 40,000 stayed 40,000, and the stocks that were 60,000 also fell to 30,000. So in both cases, losing 50% of the 60,000, losing 30,000, your portfolio falls from 100,000 to 70,000. So the effect is the exact same. In both scenarios, when you had 60% stock and they fell by half, you lost 30% of your portfolio. You went from 100,000 to 70,000. Okay, you're with me so far, I hope. Now it gets complicated. Now you want to take out some money. If you have two different index funds, one is bonds and one is stocks, and stocks just fell by half, hopefully you've listened to enough episodes of this show that you would know to not sell the fucking stocks, right? They just fell by half from 60,000 to 30,000, and you pull $10,000 that you need out of the bond fund. Again, in this scenario, the $10,000 represents 10% of the original amount and much more than 10% of the current $70,000 amount. I'm doing this for a purpose, so work with me a little bit here. In the target date fund, the fund also has 40,000 in bonds and 30,000 in stocks, which the ratio is no longer 60-40. At some point, that fund will likely rebalance. We're not going to discuss that detail again for the purpose of being overly simplified. So when you want to take $10,000 out of a target date fund, you take $10,000 out based on the overall performance of the fund. and based on the overall allocations within the fund. So like your investments that are 40,000 in bonds and 30,000 in stocks, inside of the target date fund, you have the same thing. It creates a situation where momentarily the ratio is no longer 40-60, but it flips the other way, where bonds are 40,000 and stocks are 30,000. So when you want to take the $10,000 out, you are essentially taking money out of both of those funds in allocation, in a ratio equivalent to what's inside of the fund. So in this scenario, you're taking out $5,700. I'm going to do some rounding here from the bonds, but you're also taking out $4,300 from the stocks, because it's about 57% bonds and 43% stocks, because the stocks fell by half and the ratio changed. After these deductions, of course, in the example where you have two funds, your bonds went from 40,000 to 30,000 because you took money out. Your stock went from 60 to 30. You didn't take anything out of there, so it's still 30. So now you have 60,000 in your portfolio. You started with 100, you lost 30%, then you took out 10,000. So you went from 100,000 to 70,000 to 60,000. Inside of the target date fund, the bulk of the money you're taking out is still in bonds, 57%, but 43% also came out of stocks. And so in the positions that you can control, you're now at 30% bonds, 30% cash. But in the target date fund, you are effectively 34% bonds and $25,700 in stocks. And that's the key difference. When you did it yourself and didn't touch the stocks, they fell from 60 to 30, and they're still 30. Inside of the target date fund, your 60,000 in stocks turned to 30,000 in stocks, and then you sold 4,300. And so now you have 25,700 in stocks, not 30,000 in stocks. Now, in this scenario, I'm going to go a couple more steps here. The market, poof, bounces right back and returns to where it was just a few months ago. Again, this is an extreme example designed to make a point. And you might say, Phil, that never happens. Well, in March of 2020, the stock market went down 35 to 40% in a month. And maybe 6 to 9 months later, it came back. So it wasn't in 1 month, but it came back pretty quickly. So this could happen. In the situation where you controlled the two different funds, your stocks went from 60 to 30. And then when the market bounced right back, your 30,000 went right back to 60,000. I hope that is pretty straightforward. You went from 60 to 30, back to 60, because you didn't touch the stock investment at all. The bonds went from 40 to 40. You took out 10, they went to 30. I'm assuming the growth again in the bounce back is 0 to make it overly simplified. So at the end of all of this, what you had at the beginning was 100,000, and now you have 90,000. You didn't touch the stocks. They lost money and they gained it all back. And you took 10,000 out of the bonds. Pretty straightforward. You started with 100. Now you have 90,000. Easy enough. With the target date fund, because you sold a portion from bonds and a portion from stocks, when the stock market returned back to where it was before, it basically doubled to get back to where it was. Year 30,000 wasn't even 30,000. It was 25,700 because you took money out of the stock position. And so it recovered back to $51,000, not $60,000. You did okay with the bonds because you didn't take out as much in bonds. So you have more in bonds than what you might have wanted to or had before. And the net result, when you own two different funds, at the end of all of these steps, you went from 100,000 to 90,000. You're out $10,000. So that's pretty, that works well. But in the target date fund, you are now at $85,714. So $4,300 less because you could not pick and choose and you could not avoid selling stocks when the market was down, because when you take money out of the target date fund, it comes out of the target date fund based on the averages and all the ratios of the things contained within the target date fund. So in this case, the $90,000 versus the $85,714, the $90,000 is 5% bigger. Again, this is overly dramatic, profoundly exaggerated, but I want to make the point that by simply owning 2 positions instead of 1 from a target date fund allows you to sell from the conservative position when the stock market is down 100%. That's where your 10,000 came from. In the target date fund, you get a ratio of your money back from bonds and you get a ratio of your money back from stocks. So when the market then does recover, you have less in the stock portion than what you might have wanted or what you could have had if you just left it alone. And so in this extreme scenario, in just 1 year's time period, you would have 5% more money if you had 2 funds to choose from versus 1 position to choose from. And this is where having the granularity and the clarity to be able to see what you have in different investment types. And this, of course, if it's blown out in $1 million portfolio and many, many funds, you have a variety of bond funds to choose from. You have different stock index funds to choose from. You have domestic and international. You have international growth and value. You have Europe. You have the Pacific area. You have small stocks, emerging markets. And then, of course, in the U.S., you have 6 different positions in stocks. And even in the bonds, you have different bond positions where maybe part of the bonds actually, instead of all of the bonds making 0, maybe part of the bonds made 2 or 4% and part of the bonds lost money. So you can dig in even deeper to emphasize this effect, because you don't want to have 5% less in your portfolio from a year. Again, an extreme example, maybe the difference is 1 or 2%. But if you are making 1 or 2% less per year in your portfolio because you have no ability to go in with a scalpel and pull out the money from where you want to pull it out from, you should expect to have overall lower performance. And so that is also part of the argument for why you want to have the granularity and the clarity of what you have and being able to sell and buy and rebalance and pick and choose. It all comes down to that kind of activity where you can have more control over your portfolio. The target date fund would be profoundly easy. You put the money in and you take out the 10,000 when you want to, and you just ignore the details. You might be just fine. And like I said, it might be better than the other choices available to you in some cases. But if you can control the money, having the individual index funds, to me, is significantly better than just having it in a target date fund. That was a lot. That was a lot to explain. I hope that made sense. If it doesn't, let me know. You can send me an email, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com, and maybe I can take another run at it. Of course, the short answer here is that with a big drop in stocks and then a correction at some point in the future, you could have materially more money by being able to control what you sell and when you sell it. I do hope you're having a good time at the Phil Ferguson Show today. I know I appreciate you being here. If you'd like, you can go leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or on iTunes, I think, or Stitcher. That'd be greatly appreciated. Of course, you can share links of the show to your friends so they can listen to the show. You, of course, can send me topic ideas through email, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com, and we can take a look at that. Something that this is much more time sensitive, a big bunch of the highest flying stocks, the large cap growth stocks in the last few days or few weeks have really gotten the shit kicked out of them. And it's one of those things, the idea of momentum, one of the investment ideas that I do not ascribe to. momentum is one of these philosophies that whatever is kind of the hottest thing and whatever is growing the most is the most likely thing to grow the most next, tomorrow, the next week, the next month. And that includes things like Google and Amazon and Netflix. And some of them have been beaten up. I think it was Netflix maybe that's down 30%. Tesla's down 30% almost, depending on what day you look at it, from its high last fall. And in general, the market right now is kind of soft. Depending on exactly what day you look at it, it might be down plus or minus 7 or 8%. The interesting thing is that large cap growth is down 10 to 12, and large cap value is down 0 to 2. And so in the short term, which I don't really care about much, but it's kind of cool to see, in the short term, it has worked out very well for all of us if you have hedged out of large cap growth and growth in total. Because right now my recommendation is, and has been since the big drop for COVID in 2020, in March of 2020, 60% value, 40% growth. And boy, has that worked out. I don't get everything right, but that one was sure a doozy. Another thing, just a quick thought about bonds. I'm looking at the Vanguard Long-Term Government Bond Fund. What is this? VLGSX, I think, is the symbol. It is down. It was down almost 6% last year, calendar year 2021. And in the last 5 weeks, it's down another 6%. So after a couple of years shying away from long-term bond funds where they didn't lose money, because I was concerned that interest rates were going up, they are now losing money. To lose 12 or 13% in a bond fund that you thought was going to make you 2% or 2.5% will be a surprise. Matter of fact, the very short-term government bond fund is down, give or take 1%. The corporate one is down 2%. Not very big numbers. And of course, it may change and they may turn positive. I don't think that's going to happen for the long-term bond funds for quite some time, but it's something that we've talked about. It's something about hedging towards high quality and really short duration, or international bonds, perhaps with a splash of junk, which is not high quality, but it's one of the things that made money last year in the bond market. It's actually down 3% in the last 5 weeks. And I normally don't look at what has happened in weeks, but it just caught my attention. So I just figured I'd cover that for a minute or two here. So that's about all for today. Hopefully you found it an enjoyable show and you learned something. If you want me to cover a topic, as I said before, send me an email, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. You know, I just popped into my head, something I haven't done in a while is a review of a church budget. So keep your eyes out for church documents, church budgets, church statements. If you happen to go to church with your family on Easter coming up, or for a wedding or a funeral, or to vote, well, that's a sad state of affairs. But if you happen to be in a church, look around on some table near the front door or in the hallway or outside of the big room. I don't even remember what we call that. Take a look, and if you see a pile of documents there that you can take a copy of it, scan it in, send it to me. Those are always so much fun to go over and look at how incredibly little money the average church does for benefit of other people, for the welfare of the people around them. It's really, really a small amount. And they got a big building they pay for, and an accordion and staff members and the minister and maybe teachers if it's a school. There's a lot of money they have to spend to keep going as an organization, which is totally to be expected. But sometimes people think when I donate money, 50, 60% of it or more is going to help poor people in my community. It's not. It's not. It just, maybe it is for some church here or some church there, but the vast majority of them, you're talking about 5% of the money donated to a church actually goes out to help people in need. And that's kind of a heartbreaker. So I'm looking for more of those. I guess I'll just wrap it up here, and hopefully I get to see you in April, the middle of April, for the American Atheist Conference. I think it's going to be the first thing I've done in like 2 years. So until then, ciao.